Good morning and welcome to the Office of Procurement Regulations virtual sensitization session on the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee. I'm Tamara Roy, Head of Corporate Communications, and I will be a moderator for this session. I will be supported today by Ms. Rhonda Joy Lewis, Corporate Communications Officer. Before I introduce our presenters this morning, I wish to acknowledge Ms. Beverly Khan, Chairman and Procurement Regulator, who is not with us yet, but we expect that she may join at some time. In terms of the team who will be presenting to you, I wish to introduce Ms. Marisa De La Rosa, Head Procurement Capacity Development, Ms. Lindian Mitchell, Head of Legal, Ms. Devika Singh, Policy Officer, and Ms. Laura Hirlal, Property Disposal Officer. In today's session, these presenters will delve into the purpose and regulatory requirements of the PDAC, the role of its members, the importance of drafting a terms of reference for the PDAC, and PDAC's role in the disposal process. We will then open for a Q&A segment. Before we begin today's proceedings, however, please allow me to go through some helpful tips for successful engagement. Do note that your mics will be muted. Your questions during the session can be sent via the chat option on the Teams platform. These questions will be collated by our team and addressed in our question and answer segment after the presentations. Please keep your contributions helpful and be considerate to our presenters and other participants. Please know that this session is being recorded and will be shared via email and uploaded to our website. So without further delay, we now welcome Ms. Marisa De La Rosa to initiate the presentations.
Thank you very much, Tamara, and good morning to all our attendees today. I will briefly take you through the purpose and the regulatory requirements of the Public Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee, typically referred to as PDAC. So PDAC is a key committee that's responsible for overseeing as well as advising the accounting officer on public procurement and disposal activities within their respective public bodies. So the purpose of PDAC is firstly to advise. That is, PDAC provides advice to the accounting officer on recommendations made regarding procurement and disposal activities. This advice provided by PDAC must include whether the recommendation made by the named procurement officer complies with the legal and regulatory framework. Secondly, PDAC has an oversight role. That is, PDAC oversees procurement and disposal processes to ensure transparency, fairness, as well as value for money. So Part 9 of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Procurement Methods and Procedures Regulations 2021 provides that a procuring entity shall, and that means it's a mandatory requirement, establish a Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee, herein referred to as the committee. The committee must comprise of the corporate secretary or the head of legal, head of finance, a subject matter expert, and such other members as may be necessary. Regulation 21.3 indicates a member of this committee must be may be sourced, from another public body, if you indeed would not have the members required to comprise of this committee. 21.4 indicates a senior officer shall be appointed as a secretary to attend all meetings of the committee, but shall not be a member of the committee. That is, the senior officer is a non-voting member of PDAC. Of note, PDAC is not required for procurement activities under the 1 million threshold pursuant to Regulation 13 of the Simplified Procurement Regulations 2024. Regulation 13A indicates where a procuring entity is engaged in a simplified procurement, the following do not apply. A, review process by the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee established pursuant to Regulation 21 of the Procurement Methods and Procedures Regulation 2021. So with that being said, where PDAC does apply, the role of the committee is to review reports, recommendations for contract award, and procurement proceedings, and property disposal files to determine, firstly, adherence to the Act and regulations, secondly, adherence to the handbooks and guidelines, thirdly, adherence to the approved procurement or disposal strategy, and finally, achievement of the objects of the Act. The regulation continues where the committee is of the opinion that there is not adherence or achievement as set out in Subregulation 5, the committee shall recommend the appropriate action to the procurement officer with a written explanation providing the reason for his decision. 7 continues, the committee shall cause this written explanation to be forwarded to the accounting officer for his or her noting. Where there's an agreement, the committee shall give the accounting officer a written recommendation, which must be accompanied by the procurement proceedings file or the property disposal file. Of note, all members of PDAC have a duty to disclose any interest. Subregulation 9 indicates a member of the committee shall disclose his interest and not take part in the proceedings of the committee where he, A, is a member, director, or shareholder of a company or other body corporate, B, is a proprietor or partner in a firm or partnership, C, is employed by or is otherwise a party to a contract for services, D, has a financial interest in or relationship with someone, or E, is a relative or an individual being reviewed by the committee. And now that I have established the regulatory requirements for PDAC as well as the role of the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee, Ms. Lindian Mitchell will take you through the composition of PDAC and its members as well as their individual roles.
Thank you, Ms. De La Rosa. So I wouldn't rehash the role of the PDAC in terms of, again, just reiterating adherence to the Act and the regulations, adherence to the handbooks and guidelines, adherence to the approved procurement disposal strategy, and the objects of the Act. So we will look now at the composition of PDAC. And what I want to touch on here is that we recognize some of the challenges that some public bodies face regarding the construction and operationalization of this committee. And as such, where it doesn't provide for alternates, or maybe it refers to title as opposed to maybe the qualification and experience of an officer of the committee, or in terms of the legal complement of a public body, we only have the corporate secretary who serves as head of legal or the only legal representative in that entity. And we appreciate some of those challenges. As such, we are moving for amendments, and that should be in short order in terms of addressing some of those concerns. So what is the role of the corporate secretary or head legal? This is the legal skill set that is required on this committee. So the overarching responsibility is reviewing the procurement proceeding and disposal file to ensure legal integrity, compliance, and fairness of the procurement and the disposal process. So the corporate secretary head legal will provide support in some of these areas. They provide legal guidance to safeguard against legal risk. They will support transparency and ensure that all procurement and disposal activities adhere to the laws and regulations. They will consider mitigation of risk, ensure that there's fair and competitive bidding process, and confirm the terms and conditions of contract, and to ensure again that those terms and conditions are legally sound and robust. The head legal corporate secretary again will of course, interpret the legal requirements to the committee, explaining any complex terminology or statutory requirements in practical terms, They will also suggest improvements or updates to procurement and disposal policies and guidelines based on evolving legal standards or new regulatory requirements. So we have the role of the head of finance, and what role does the head of finance play in the construct of the committee? So the head of finance plays a critical role by providing the financial oversight of compliance and ensuring budgetary alignment. The expertise is essential to ensure that procurement and disposal decisions are fiscally responsible and aligns with the organization's financial goals and adhere to all budgetary constraints. Thereafter, we have the subject matter expert. And the subject matter expert plays, of course, a key role in reviewing, again, the procurement and proceeding disposal files to ensure that the technical specification references to quality standards and suitability of goods, works, or services are sound and it can withstand scrutiny. The subject matter expert expertise ensures that the selected products or services meet the operational needs and technical standards of the organization. The subject matter expert is instrumental in ensuring that, again, robust practices exist for managing any technical risks. Procurement decisions align with all operational needs and regulatory standards are obtained. So what are some of the additional roles and support that the subject matter expert provides? They will clarify all technical aspects of the proposal for the committee members, thus enabling an informed recommendation on the technical soundness and options or recommendations. They will review the procurement proceeding file or disposal file to validate technical specifications, ensuring accuracy, completeness, and relevance to the intended use. They will also identify potential risks, such as compatibility issues. They will ensure proper documentation of technical decisions and recommendations to maintain, again, transparency. And they will also have an input in advising on the most appropriate means for the disposal of public property, again, taking into account the nature of the property being disposed, health, safety, and environmental considerations. So this brings an end in terms of my presentation, and I will hand you over now to Ms. Viveka Singh, and she will touch on the importance of drafting a terms of reference for PDAC.
Thank you, Lindy, and good morning, everyone. So in establishing your PDAC, public bodies would now be required to develop your terms of reference for the committee. And the terms of reference should clearly outline things like the purpose of the committee, the structure of the committee, and the roles and functions of members of the committee, amongst other things, right? While the OPR does not have a standard TOR for PDAC, this part of the presentation will provide you with guidance in developing your terms of reference, but you are reminded that in developing your terms of reference, that you ensure that this is done in compliance with the Act and the regulations, right? So if you look at the slide, these are just some components that you may want to include in your terms of reference. So you may want to include the composition of the committee. Lindy would have spoken to that, the functions of the committee, procedures for meetings of the committee, conflict of interest, minutes of meetings, and findings and recommendations. Now we'll briefly go through each of these because both Lindy and Marisa would have gone into detail in their presentation on these aspects. So we'll just briefly take a look at what each of these areas may entail in your terms of reference. So as Lindy would have mentioned, the composition of the committee would be head legal, head finance, head HR, and subject matter expert, right? Now the functions of PDAC, Marisa as well would have mentioned, This is to review the procurement record and disposal of public property files to determine that the objects of the act are met, the act and regulations are adhered to, the handbooks and guidelines are adhered to, and that adherence to the procurement and disposal strategy are done, right? Now, you may also want to include in your TOR the roles and responsibilities of members and non-members of PDAC. Now, while Lily was also speaking, this is just a few examples of the functions for each person or each member, non-member of the committee. So if we look at the chairperson of the committee, they may be responsible for convening meetings, adjudicating and deciding on potential conflicts of interest, and finalizing PDAC's report and recommendation. The members of the committee, they may be responsible, or their role function will be to review documents, participate in deliberation, and review minutes. The secretary, who is a non-member, as mentioned, they may be responsible for scheduling meetings, requesting information on behalf of the committee, preparing meetings, and these roles and functions should be clearly outlined in your TOR, right? Now, another area you want to outline in your terms of reference would be procedures for holding PDAC meetings, right? So you'd want to include details of the meetings, which would be how often PDAC would meet, the date, time, and place that the meetings will be scheduled, the time frame for issuing notices and agendas of the meeting to members of the committee, time frame for sharing procurement files to members of the committee, and details for review of minutes of the meetings. Now, Marisa would have spoken to conflict of interest and what that entails. So basically, I'm not going to repeat it, but if I just, I'll briefly go through it. In terms of reference, we want to include the circumstances under which the conflict of interest may arise and what appropriate remedial action will be taken. So you'll outline this in your terms of reference, right? So just to give you one example, a conflict of interest may arise if the member of PDAC is a proprietor or a partner in a firm involved in procurement activity, which is being reviewed by the committee. And in this case, the member may recuse themselves from the committee and an alternative would be appointed. So the TOR would also include procedures for taking minutes to ensure standardization throughout. So your minutes would, in this regard, you would want to identify a person who would be responsible for preparing the minutes. If there's a particular template or format for preparing the minutes, in what form minutes will be shared, either hard copy, soft copy. You'd want to identify how minutes will be confirmed and by whom, if it will be signed by all members, and how it will be circulated. You'd also want to identify in your TOR the submission of minutes to the accounting officer. Maybe you'd want to include the time frame in which the accounting officer may review the said minutes for PDAC, right? And lastly, in your terms of reference, you will want to identify or outline the findings and recommendations of PDAC, right? So in developing your terms of reference, you may want to state how these recommendations made by PDAC are to be recorded, the possible time frames for submitting recommendations, who is responsible for communicating the recommendations of the committee, as well as what happens when members do not agree with the recommendations and how it should be recorded. So all these should be clearly identified in your terms of reference. So that will bring me to the end of my presentation, and I'll now hand you over to Laura Hirla.
Good morning, everyone. This morning, I will be taking you through PDAC's role in the disposal process. Now, before we go directly into what is PDAC's role in disposal, it is important for you to first understand the disposal process and the different persons involved in the process. And as we go through this brief overview, you will see PDAC's role here. Now, we do have a detailed disposal process chart that can be found in the retention and disposal general guidelines on page 86. As I said, it's very detailed, and along the process, there you will see the relevant disposal forms to be utilized. So the process begins when the assigned trained technically capable public officer, which is someone who is responsible for stores and inventory management, identifies items for disposal and completes a request for asset disposal form. Now, once this form is completed, it is sent to the main procurement officer who reviews this form and submits it to the disposal committee to convene a meeting in order to develop a disposal strategy. Disposal committee, just a reminder that disposal committee is a committee separate and apart from PDAC. So the disposal committee, when they receive Form A, they would begin the process by assessing property for disposal, which can be done by doing an inspection and inventory, and then determine the estimated values by doing a valuation or appraisal. Disposal committee would then be required to conduct a requirement, stakeholder, and market analysis and develop a disposal strategy with the approved disposal option. Now, disposal committee would be required to fill out forms. In the disposal form, there will be forms B to E, and sign off on Form E and submit the entire report along with all forms to the main procurement officer. The main procurement officer, upon receiving the full report, would review and sign off on Form E and then forward to the PDAC. So here we see what is PDAC's role. PDAC reviews the full report in detail and signs off accordingly on disposal strategy approval Form E once in agreement. If clarification or additional information is required, the request is sent back to the NPO and then back to the disposal committee members for a response. Now, all disposal forms and reports are then submitted once approved to the accounting officer equivalent for review and final approval. The accounting officer would receive the full report, and once the disposal strategy is approved, the accounting officer would sign off on Form E and return the entire report back to PDAC, back to NPO for executing the disposal strategy. However, if the accounting officer also requires clarification or additional information, it goes again through the process, PDAC, back to the NPO, and then back to the disposal committee. Now, once the report has been approved by the accounting officer and the main procurement officer and disposal committee receives it, they are responsible for executing the disposal strategy as approved and complete the summary reports of approved disposal action Form F. The main procurement officer would then be required to submit Form F to PDAC and the accounting officer for signature. And once everything is completed, the main procurement officer would then report the disposal to the OPR through the procurement depository within 6 weeks of completion of its disposal. So that was basically a brief overview of the disposal process. Again, you can find the detailed disposal chart on page 86 of the Retention and Disposal General Guidelines, along with the disposal forms in the appendix. So as I went through the disposal process, you would have seen exactly what is PDAC's role, which is to review the disposal strategy report submitted by the main procurement officer from the disposal committee. Now, when PDAC is reviewing the disposal report, there are some key elements they should look for before the report is signed and sent to the accounting officer. So PDAC should ensure that the property for disposal underwent proper inventory and inspection and appraisal. And this could be done by looking at the inspection and inventory form as well as the valuation and appraisal form. PDAC should then ensure that the selected disposal strategy is properly justified, look for evidence of market and stakeholder analysis, pros and cons of proposed disposal methods, etc. This can be done by PDAC reviewing Form D, which is the actual disposal strategy report. PDAC should then ensure that the disposal process was followed and that all applicable parties were notified and included, ensuring that everybody signs off on the report, and they should also make sure that all applicable forms were completed and utilized in the disposal process. Now, here we have a sample of Form E, which is the disposal strategy approval form. which is one of the first forms that PDAC is required to sign off on. Now, once PDAC committee has no objections to the disposal report received from the disposal committee, they then sign off on this form and send it to the accounting officer with the entire report for approval. And then the second form that PDAC has to sign off on is Form F, which is the summary report of approved disposal action. This form is completed once the NPO signs off on the executed disposal and then submits to PDAC and the accounting officer for final signature. So that basically brings me to the end of the presentation, and now I'll hand you back over to Ms. Tamara.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you to our other presenters. Today, we will now open for the Q&A session. So some of you would have placed your questions in the chat. We have collated those, and we will address those accordingly. I will now hand you over to Rhonda Joy Lewis, who will administer the same.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roy, and good morning again, stakeholders. Our first question for our panel this morning: in the case of disposals, do the monetary thresholds apply? And I'll ask our head of property disposal, Ms. George Joseph Lara, to respond.
Good morning, and the simple answer is no. Monetary threshold for disposal do not apply.
Thank you, Ms. Joseph Lara. Our second question: please clarify PDAC's rule for simple procurement.
You will be wondering what I have touched in the rules, so what I've touched on this provision pursuant to the simplified procurement regulations 2024, that is regulation 3, whereby the procuring entity who is engaged in a simplified procurement that is under $1 million, the process by PDAC is disapplied.
Okay, stakeholders, we understand some of you may not be hearing too clearly, so we will ask Ms. Mitchell to repeat her answer. The question was, please clarify PDAC's role for simple procurement.
Ms. De La Rosa would have touched on this area in her presentation. Regulation 13 provides that PDAC is disapplied.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mitchell. And some stakeholders were saying that they did not hear the response to the first question, which was, in the case of disposals, do the monetary thresholds apply?
No, the answer is no.
Thank you. Our third question: is it mandatory that items over $1 million go to PDAC?
So presently, yes, the provisions in accordance with the procurement methods regulation, which provides a PDAC, items over $1 million must go to PDAC. However, we are moving some amendments regarding this particular area whereby we should only obtain to high risk, high value procurement activities. And as I said, some amendments will come to this particular area in short order.
While the legal and finance members are required for the committee, are they required to meet the quorum for discussions on a matter? As there are suggestions that while legal must be a member, that are not required to be present for every matter. Can this be clarified?
It is essential that the members, legal and finance, constitute the quorum properly and be present and be part of all discussions regarding that particular meeting, whereby the discussion is had with that particular procurement activity.
Thank you. Someone is asking, I would like to know if the role of legal on the bid evaluation team conflicts with the role of legal in the PDAC. And if yes, will that mean that legal can never be on the evaluation team?
Yeah, so if it is the member who is on the evaluation team, yes, I agree that there will be a conflict in sitting on that role in terms of PDAC. What it is I would recommend is if there's another legal officer or someone who is an attorney in that particular procuring entity that will provide the support regarding the PDAC aspect and advising accordingly. So if it is one cannot be sourced from within the public body, you could also outsource as well from another public body that expertise or that skill set required.
Thank you for your response. What are the recommended actions for appointing alternates?
Right now, it is, we don't have, that is another shortcoming of the construct of the composition of the committee. But, of course, will be necessary because you may have conflict of interest issues. So what I would advise is that, not when sourcing another alternate, you see qualification and experience be considered.
Thank you for your response. Can you touch on the disposal committee's role for disposal of items through donation?
This presentation was specifically on the PDAC, but just to give an idea, Laura would have advised that the disposal committee is responsible for deciding on the strategy, meaning the disposal method of the item. So the committee will decide on the method of disposal. In this case, it is donation, and the committee will justify it through strategy development for review and approval through the PDAC and final approval by the accounting office.
So the PDAC and disposal committee may have some similar members, or does that pose a conflict? Also, based on the question before, can members of PDAC also be on the disposal committee?
The members and the composition of the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee is different from the members of the Disposal Committee, as the presenters would have advised in the presentation.
All right, so we just go through some more questions that you posed to the panel to your stakeholders. And yes, to confirm, the slides and the recording from today's session will be posted on our website, and we will send an email out to all attendees notifying you of when the information has been posted on our website. So we have another question. How is disposal of assets or state land to be treated?
Well, we currently do not have the disposal regulations. That is one of the regulations that is still outstanding regarding what procedural process should the public body adopt for the disposal of real property. We are hoping in short order that by way of the minister and in consultation with the office, those regulations should be published and approved.
Thank you for your response. Another question. Can the PDAC question be approved procurement strategy that was sufficiently justified in a business case and approved by the accounting officer?
The PDAC role is to review everything that is in the procurement proceedings file. So if there's some sort of irregularity that is recognized during the review process, it is within PDAC's role to draw that to the attention of the NPO and make whatever necessary recommendations accordingly to the accounting officer.
Does the PDAC have to maintain their own file system for the disposal process?
Even if they wish to maintain their own records, I mean, they could do so for their own record keeping. So that is advised.
Okay, we have another question. Should the assigned officer who is signing Form A be the subject matter expert who sits on the disposal committee, or the head of the department or senior manager or executive to which the SME belongs?
The assigned officer who is signing the Form A is usually the requester. Not sure of the other part of the question. I think we need some further clarification in terms of the other part of the question. Answer it.
So we're going through your questions, and we'd just like to pose this question. What are the requirements for valuation of items for disposal? Can a value be ascribed internally or a specialist be needed?
So this is dependent on the category of the assets in terms of high value or low value. It is recommended for high value items like vehicles, real property, that you get an external valuation report, an official valuation report. For smaller assets, internally, like your FF&E equipment, you can internally estimate through your accounts department the value of the assets accordingly.
All right. Our next question. Can the chairman of PDAC be rotated?
Yes, certainly the chairman of PDAC can be rotated amongst the committee.
Does PDAC have to review every disposal?
Yes, every strategy development report and every disposal, the PDAC has to review, and final approval is provided by the accounting office.
Does the disposal process apply to the disposal of scrap?
The simple answer is yes, all disposals apply to the disposal process.
Can a company set a threshold in its delegation of authority that only items over $5 million go to the PDAC? Or is this in contravention of the law?
The regulation doesn't provide for any kind of threshold, so as it stands now, everything that is over $1 million, PDAC will apply.
If the PDAC makes a recommendation that the NPO and Evaluation Committee is not in agreement with, what is the way forward?
This is supposed to be submitted to the accounting officer. So if there's still a disagreement, between the NPO and the evaluation committee, all of this is supposed to be documented and submitted to the accounting officer, who has the final decision.
There are also some concerns on the integrity of the minutes. Can a training for minute taking be done, or can you recommend an in-depth course?
Well, training on taking of minutes or minute taking, I know the Public Service Academy offers that type of training, so maybe your organization can contact them and set up a session.
Sorry. So, question for 16. Can a public body proceed with disposal of an irreparable item that's posing an HSE threat using an internal PDAC in the absence of a head legal?
Of the PDAC, so the absence of the legal manager. That is certainly a concern and in contravention of the regulations. If it is that there's some issue regarding as why it is maybe the absence of the head of legal, you all should be aware of regulations 21.3, which provides that a member of the committee could be outsourced and from another public body. So I hope that addresses that particular question.
Okay, another question to the team. Can a public body dispose of real property in the absence of these regulations?
And the simple answer is yes. And what we have guided public bodies is that they follow their present disposal procedures in terms of disposal of real property pending the regulation.
Okay, we're just seeking, Mr. Garraway, a little clarification on your question, please. You can type it in the chat. And the question you posed was, is the disposal strategy or policy company specific? Meaning, is it created and approved by the board of directors? Or is the disposal strategy Procurement Act specific and the entity must strictly follow the act? So we're just seeking a little bit of clarity, Mr. Garraway. We invite you to provide a little bit more clarity for us on that question in the chat, please. Thank you.
But just to advise briefly, the disposal strategy, everything in the disposal process is according to the Procurement Act, right? And the disposal strategy is developed by the disposal committee specifically
And the regulation.
and guided by the regulation.
Yes.
So can a senior legal officer occupy the position as the chairman of the PDAC?
If it is that there's the absence of a head legal or corporate secretary, sitting in the senior legal officer, they fulfill that role.
So our next question of the panel, when will guidance/regulations for disposal of low value items, for example, desk chairs, be simplified similar to micro procurement rules?
So for disposal, there isn't any threshold. All disposals are treated the same and follows the disposal process. Reported to your NPO. Disposal committee decides on the strategy through the PDAC for final approval by the accounting office.
Is the PDAC to be treated like an evaluation committee that is created for specific procurement, or should it be a standalone committee for a specific period?
Well, it is a standing committee of the public body.
All right, Ms. Smart is asking, Is it therefore that once legal and finance are present as the quorum, there is no need to have a subject matter expert? And she's seeking some clarification on this.
As it stands, based on regulation 21(2), the committee shall comprise of the head legal, corporate, and the finance, subject matter expert, and any other members as necessary. So in terms of, if it is you're looking at the composition, makeup of the committee, surely you would not want to have a meeting in the absence of any of these other members. So it will be advised that you have your head legal, your head of finance, and your subject matter expert to give the input of all.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Betcha. Okay, our next question to the panel. Please clarify the statement that procurement transactions over $1 million must be referred to the PDAC, with a company whose procurement spend bypasses $1 million frequently need to apply to the OPR for an amendment to operate according to their financial threshold.
I understand the challenges in operating within this confine, but as it stands, the regulations and the act do not provide for any threshold within the PDAC itself. As I said, we do have an amendment for PDAC to only apply to high risk, high value procurement activities, but in its present construct and form, once it is the activity crosses 1 million, the PDAC must continue and sit accordingly.
Our next question to the panel. How is the disposal of state land by lease treated? For example, if there is an expression of interest, does it fall under the definition of a disposal?
And confirm that disposal by lease is falls under the definition of disposal of public property. And as advised before, public bodies for disposal of real property can follow their internal disposal process pending regulation.
When considering evaluation committee reports, is there any limit to the PDAC's role?
No, there's no limit in terms of PDAC's role pertaining to considering the evaluation committee report.
Are there more specific guidelines in meeting the 4 criteria that the PDAC must satisfy?
I am just thinking as to whether any of our guidelines touches on this particular area. We don't have any, but it certainly could be an area we could address and provide some guidance.
Thank you for your patience, stakeholders. We'll just present the next question to our panel. If you have submitted in your amended handbook a value that is higher than the TT $1 million and that was approved for the PDAC, will that be accepted?
That we will reach out to your entity regarding this particular approval that we're referring to, and have some sort of further discussion and clarity.
All right, Mr. Hicks is asking, just to be clear, is an amendment coming that is anticipated? Let me read that again. Just to be clear, an amendment is coming that it is anticipated will do away with the requirement for PDAC to evaluate every procurement that is over $1 million.
That's the grant, and PDAC will not evaluate, it will advise, right? It will review and advise based on handbooks and guidelines, the act and regulations, achievement of the objects of the act. The amendment is not coming to do away with PDAC. The amendment will be coming to looking at those items that are over procurement activities that are over 1 million. PDAC involvement will only be relevant to obtain with high value, high risk procurement activity. And it will be up to the procuring entity to determine by way of their procurement strategy development and the risks. What are those procurement activities that are high value, high risk activities?
Our next question to the panel. Is there a source of funds template that can be utilized for disposals meet regulation 6.4F, or are public bodies responsible for developing it?
As a responsibility of the public body.
On the issue of minutes at the PDAC meeting, is submitting the memo to the AO sufficient stating that the PDAC recommended as set out in the memo, or should there be detailed minutes capturing the discussions, queries raised, and answers, etc.?
What I will advise is that you prepare the fully content officers decision. And this is to repeat that recommendation to the accounting officer. We also prepare minutes as well, including minutes. So in the instance that there is some sort of disagreement or some type of information that would require further clarification, if I doesn't move with a recommendation, let us say. It is advised that for all meetings of the PDAC that minutes be so captured, and the discussions be captured in the form of minutes. So
Our next question to the team, does the PDAC or procurement officer have any advisory role in when items should be considered for disposal in an entity?
So the asset is managed by an assigned technically capable officer as guided in regulations. So that person who manages the assets of the organization is the one, or the person or individual who would advise on the items requiring disposal.
If the PDAC is not in agreement with a recommendation based on concerns upon review of the report and the evaluation committee is sticking with their report, what is the role of the PDAC?
The role of the PDAC with regulation 21.6 is that when the committees of the opinion that there was non-adherence or the achievement, non-adherence to the part of the regulations or the achievement as set out in Regulation 5 that refers to the objects of the act, it shall recommend the appropriate action to the procurement officer with a written explanation and providing reasons for this decision.
All right, Mr. Gary has stated that his question is answered. Thank you very much.
Don't hear the mic.
Can there be one dispensing member of PDAC?
Yes, this would be one sending member of PDAC and that will be captured.
Will any guidance be given to small NGOs with limited staff to fill various roles with sourcing persons from other public bodies are proving to be difficult?
We will use the concerned papers and translates particular and student notes.
All right, Mr. Griffith, was it stipulated who shall be appointed the chairman of the PDAC?
Then in terms of the chairperson of PDAC, where we have the committee shall comprise of the head of finance, head corporate secretary, legal or corporate secretary, subject matter expert. But the chairperson could be rotated, that would be advised that the rotation in terms of preparing the meeting be done.
There's a common perception that the PDAC has replaced the tenders committee when in fact PDAC reviews, not approves. And the recommendation from Ms. Scarborough is that the APR should consider reiterating this.
Agreed, in fact, yes, not once again, in the committee shall review reports and make recommendations for contract award and procurement proceedings and property disposal files. So I agree, and thank you for that. It reviews and we have a to the accounting officer.
Thank you for your patience, stakeholders. Well, we just want to let you all know that we have rectified a technical issue on our part with regard to the audio feed. So we just want to ask if maybe one or two stakeholders could just give us a thumbs up or maybe type in the chat section just to let us know if you're hearing us a lot clearer now. Great. Thank you very much for your feedback. Okay, so what we will do at this time is we will invite some stakeholders. If there was a particular question that you had that you wanted further clarification on, that you were not hearing the response clearly, if you can just respond to it once it was identified in the chat, so we will know which questions to go over the answers to, right? So we're
Going to take it from Ms. Badri's question. If an in-house estimate is below the Act's threshold for a tender, but the bids all fall within the tender threshold, should that RFQ then move to PDAC as it now falls within that threshold?
So to answer this question, notwithstanding the estimate may have been under 1 million, once the value of the award is above 1 million, then the necessary procedure is it must go to PDAC.
All right, another question posed to the team. If there is a variation to an awarded contract, should it be reviewed by PDAC? If yes, and the variation is under $1 million, is it exempt from PDAC's review? Or is it that the total varied costs of the contract is to be considered in determining the review?
Yeah, and from my understanding, the total varied cost of the contract is to be considered and will be reviewed.
Can the disposal committee approve a disposal strategy, which includes the disposal of items en bloc? Is that permissible? For example, where there are many unusable or unserviceable items of the same nature, can one disposal form or process be used generally for all?
So to answer the first part of the question, please be reminded that the disposal committee doesn't approve a disposal strategy. The accounting officer is responsible for approving the disposal strategy. The disposal committee is the committee to decide on what is the best disposal strategy or method of disposal for the identified items. In terms of the latter part of the question, you can group your items and conduct one disposal based on the completion of the Form A. The items can be grouped and a disposal process can be executed accordingly.
The review by the PDAC can create a delay in the procurement process. Are there expected timeframes for the review of the process by the PDAC? Additionally, what is the provision for the procurement becoming urgent as a result of a lapse of time by the PDAC?
Agreed. So in terms of the communication, the NPO would inform the PDAC or the chairperson of PDAC regarding the urgency of treating with this matter. And as such, we know that this should really be a seamless process in terms of treating with the review of this particular procurement activity. So it is expected that the parties who are involved in the procurement process, the recommendation process, the decision-making process could work cohesively in trying to achieve the outcome of that particular activity.
Can the PDAC be responsible for review of additional procurement processes, such as variations of contracts?
Yes, PDAC could also review such.
All right, we're seeing another question that was posted earlier, so we just want to address it at this time. So as mentioned in the presentation, Section 21(4) indicates a senior officer shall be appointed as a secretary to attend all meetings of the committee, but shall not be a member of the committee. Some public bodies have been maintaining the old structure of the tenders committee and are requiring the NPO to be the secretary of the PDAC. Is it considered proper for the NPO to sit as the secretary on both the procurement and disposal review proceedings when it is the recommendation of that same officer under review? And the NPO or secretary will thereafter be drafting to himself or herself the recommendation of the PDAC. Thank you for your question.
So again, in accordance with the regulation 24, yes, I'll just read it for ease of reference. A senior officer shall be appointed as the secretary to attend all meetings of the committee, but shall not be a member of the committee. And I will not advise that the NPO in this instance, based on your question, the NPO be the recording secretary in the PDAC meetings. That will not be advisable at all, given some of the examples that it is you would have shared there, of course.
So we have a question. Can there be clarification on the head HR as a mandatory member of the PDAC committee? It was noted in one of the slides in this presentation.
So while this slide did indicate head HR as a member, it's not a mandatory member of the committee. It's just an example of one such member that can sit on the PDAC committee. So HR is not a mandatory committee. It's an example of another member that can sit on PDAC.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Singh. If urgent approval is needed, but the finance officer cannot be on the PDAC as they were on the evaluation committee, as there was no head, what are we to do in that situation as it is proven difficult to source other persons from other public bodies?
Well, I appreciate the challenges that some public bodies will be facing to maybe outsource members from another public body, but the regulations only provides that a member of a committee may be sourced from another public body. If it is, we have to consider any other proposals. We will maybe have to call for a further amendment of the act, but at this time, we may have to consult further regarding how it is to facilitate such in a timely manner, given whatever ongoing activities that this public body is engaged in.
Okay, we have a question from Mr. Griffith that we would just like to address now. Was it stipulated who shall be appointed the chairman of the PDAC?
Just to reiterate that the chairperson of the PDAC could be rotated amongst the members. Again, the members of the committee are the head legal / corporate secretary, head of finance, subject matter expert, or such members as may be necessary.
Should any member of the evaluation committee serve as secretary to the PDAC?
I will not advise that members of the evaluation committee serve as the secretary to PDAC. I'm sure it have other senior officers within the public body that maybe could fulfill that role.
When the PDAC identifies issues in the tender evaluation reports that require revision or more probing, a practice has developed where the tender evaluation committee states that PDAC advise X or Y. Are there recommendations on how this should be better addressed, as the PDAC should review and advise, not dictate?
Certainly, I appreciate the situation as you outlined in the question there. Yes, it is. PDAC's role is to review, make a recommendation to the accounting officer. If for some reason there is disagreement between the evaluation committee and PDAC's role, because PDAC's role is very important and integral to the process. In just looking at the achievement of the objects of the act, there may very well be situations there that they think needs to be drawn to the attention of the accounting officer, right? There may be activities or acts within the process that they see as some sort of irregularity and wish to have it addressed. So as such, if it is an ongoing concern in terms of the PDAC, and they may very well choose to, and it is advised that they address such, document it, and have it addressed to the accounting officer, who at the end of the day makes the final determination.
The PDAC secretary is described as a senior officer. This definition may vary in public bodies. The Act only describes a senior officer in Section 58, read the ineligibility list. Can the definition of PDAC secretary be better clarified?
Yes, this is one of the areas as well that calls for amendment. The particular provision will be redrafted to really address or along the lines more of a suitably experienced, competent person to perform secretarial duties, who shall be appointed as a secretary to attend all these meetings. So we recognize the challenge with the particular wording of this provision, and it will be addressed as well in our upcoming amendments.
Can the PDAC committee advise the evaluation committee concerns or to make revisions to the evaluation report? Or is it that any comments of concerns be noted and forwarded to the accounting officer?
All comments or concerns or areas of clarification should be documented and be addressed to the accounting officer.
Should any member of the evaluation committee serve as secretary to PDAC?
Again, that will be inherent conflict of interest. So no, once it is your member of the evaluation committee, you cannot serve as, I will not advise that you also serve as, what is it, as a secretary, as a secretary to the PDAC. Even though the secretary is not a voting member, as the regulation states, the senior officers that attend meetings shall be appointed as a secretary, but not be a member of the committee. I will not advise of such.
All right, and someone is just asking for a repeat of the answers to this particular question. So the question was, if there is a variation to an awarded contract, should it be reviewed by the PDAC? And if yes, and the variation is under $1 million, is it exempt from the PDAC's review? Or is it that the total varied cost of the contract is to be considered in determining the review?
I would advise that the total varied cost of the contract is to be addressed.
All right, someone's asking for a repeat of the answer to this question. Okay, and we take this opportunity to welcome any final questions that you may have, and we just want to sincerely apologize to all stakeholders for the background noise during our presentation this morning, but we had to seek answers to your question. We must refer and refer to the relevant subject matter experts in the room. So we do sincerely apologize once again. Our next question for the panel. For PDAC consideration, are we considering VAT inclusive or exclusive values?
So for PDAC, we will be considering inclusive values, VAT inclusive values, because the simplified regulations would have indicated that the value should be inclusive of VAT duties and other charges, right?
Thank you for your patience, stakeholders. So our next question to the team. Should the NPO be present in the PDAC meeting?
It may not at all times be necessary, but certainly the PDAC could call the NPO to clarify, to provide further discussion as it deems necessary.
Thank you for your response. After the PDAC report is submitted, is there a requirement for the NPO to advise the PDAC on the course of action?
Well, once the PDAC report is submitted to the accounting officer, by way of a recommendation, there really isn't much of a role there for the NPO. I mean, if further clarification is required from the NPO, that could be undertaken, of course.
Should the irregularities with the evaluation committee report not be forwarded to the procurement officer first? In keeping with Regulation 21.6, this does not refer to any direct report to the accounting officer. Please clarify.
Yes, I agree. It will go to the NPO for the NPO to clarify. Once it is that the PDAC is satisfied with the clarification, or the case might be they may not be satisfied with the clarification, that review and recommendation from PDAC will then move to the accounting officer.
With these recommendations for amendments coming out of today's session, will there be a follow-up consultation with stakeholders on said amendments?
Yes, certainly there will be consultation and this further discussion relative to those areas once it is we complete the process of having the approval, the parliamentary approval.
Sure, another question to the panel. What should the recommendations from the PDAC look like without risk of appearing to re-evaluate the tenderers and selecting a successful bidder?
What should the recommendations from PDAC look like?
Is it that you asking whether or not it doesn't look like the evaluation report, or is it that you want to know if it comes in a memo form? If you could provide a little more clarification on what exactly the question is, we'll be able to provide feedback.
Okay, so we're just going to answer the question that was posed by Ms. Lewis. What should the recommendations from the PDAC look like without risk of appearing to re-evaluate the tenderers and selecting a successful bidder?
So the recommendation really is, as I said, we are reviewing the procurement proceeding file or the disposal file. So if it is during the conduct of the review, you are examining adherence to the act and regulations, you're looking at the handbooks and guidelines, approved internal processes or guidelines, achievements of the objects of the act. If there are red flags relative to these areas, this is what it is the PDAC will be documenting and thereafter providing their feedback, their concerns, or their issues as the case might be.
Thank you for your response. Will the subject matter expert change for each transaction?
Yes, it may very well change for the nature of the procurement activity.
The regulations call for a written explanation where there is disagreement by PDAC to be given to the procurement officer, not to the accounting officer, as advised earlier in responding to a question. And Ms. Dabra is just asking for some clarification on this.
Yes, that is in relative to 21.6. Recommend the appropriate action to the procurement officer where there is non-adherence to the or achievement as set out in accordance with sub-regulation 5. That is to be sent to the procurement officer with written explanation providing reasons for its decision. The committee, in accordance with Regulation 7, further dictates that the committee shall cause that written explanation to be forwarded to the accounting officer for noting. So that is in addition to Regulation 21.6. So 21.7 further provides that this said written explanation is to be forwarded to the accounting officer for noting.
Is there a limit on how many times a procurement activity should be referred to the PDAC? For example, if the PDAC recommendations identify particular clarifications and inconsistencies with the process or evaluation report, should the supplementary reports also be submitted to the PDAC for review?
Well, there's no limit on how many times a procurement activity should be addressed to or referred to PDAC. And certainly if there are supplementary reports relative to the matter at hand, it should be provided to the PDAC for review.
The 4 criteria guiding the PDAC are very fluid and subjective. For example, where there may be amendments to the handbooks and guidelines. How is one to practically determine adherence with volumes of literature to be considered? It is all very broad.
Well, I agree, yes, and that is deliberate because you want, again, the nature of PDAC's role in the process. And that is used as a safeguard. So my response to that will be, yes, it is. We recognize that the process as outlined in 21.5 in terms of the role of the committee. Yes, it is broad and it is deliberately so, again, to provide this safeguard in terms of the procurement process.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Mitchell. Can the PDAC recommend negotiation of price after reviewing the evaluation report put forward by the NPO?
Yeah, I will not advise of any negotiation of price after reviewing the evaluation report as PDAC's rule. That may be something that that will be something I will not advise of.
Shall the PDAC be required to seek clarifications from only the NPO, or shall the PDAC be able to directly access subject matter experts on the evaluating committee in the company of the NPO, who may be better able to answer highly technical queries?
Well, if it is a situation like this, I will advise that whatever it is, clarification be done in the presence of the subject matter expert and the NPO.
If there are revisions to the evaluation report, should all iterations be retained as part of the procurement proceedings file and for record keeping? And if so, both hard and electronic copies?
Yes, certainly, and in accordance with the record of procurement proceedings regulations, that should be maintained. All iterations of the report be kept and maintained in both hard and electronic copies.
If the evaluation recommendation asks that approval be granted to negotiate on cost, can the PDAC approve such a request?
So based on your question, you'll need to make sure it is in compliance with the solicitation documents, your regulations, and the act. So once it is not, and the handbooks and guidelines. So once it's not in contravention of any of these documents, PDAC, they're not approving, but they can make a recommendation, right?
Okay, so we're just going to repeat the question that we will explain at this time. If the evaluation recommendation asks that approval be granted to negotiate on cost, can the PDAC approve such a request?
So PDAC doesn't approve. What they do is recommend to the accounting officer, right? And in terms of negotiation, if any negotiation is to take place, this would have taken place prior to it reaching to PDAC, right? So, and this would, the negotiation or clarification on negotiation would be between the NPO seeking the advice of the AO on terms of the negotiation, ensuring that it is in compliance with the solicitation document. So just to be reminded that PDAC doesn't approve, it recommends based on the evaluation committee's file that is provided to PDAC.
Our next question to our panel: when dealing with land disposals, is there a need for the board to issue their non-objections after the PDAC recommendations are put forth, or would the recommendations from the PDAC suffice to facilitate this?
So just to reiterate, we do not have the regulations for disposal of real property or land, and public bodies are advised to utilize their present disposal procedures. But however, based on best practice, if you are using your PDAC and your NPO for this process, in terms of the non-objection rule, it follows the same for disposal of personal property and for procurement, where the PDAC, once the file goes to the PDAC, then the file would then be forwarded to the accounting officer for final approval, and there wouldn't be any room there for any further non-objections from, as in this question, the board or anybody else. Once it goes to PDAC, PDAC reviews, and the file would then go to the accounting officer for final approval.
Okay, stakeholders, as we prepare to wrap up our presentation this morning, we just want to welcome any specific questions that you may have on the presentations this morning on PDAC, right? We just want to address any final questions that you may have before we close. So we're seeing a question requesting of the OPR to arrange a dedicated webinar for stakeholder concerns, and we do take your question and suggestion. We just want to let you know and other stakeholders know that in the coming weeks and months, we will be rolling out other webinars just like this on other areas of concern that you will raise to us. So you can rest assured that we will be addressing other areas of concern. Okay, so we're seeing a question from Ms. Badri, who did not hear the answer on whether there could be a dissenting PDAC member. And we'll just have that answer repeated for her, please.
Yes, Ms. Badri, there could be a dissenting member, and that dissenting member views could be captured again in the minutes decision to the PDAC, for the PDAC records, and then circulated accordingly.
So our question to our panel: does the OPR have or intend to publish PDAC decision and minute templates?
No, we don't intend to publish that. However, public bodies can utilize their internal minute template and maybe memo formats for PDAC decisions, and just tweak it to suit the PDAC decision itself. So you can utilize your own resources in order to
to address this.
Okay, and we take our final question from Ms. Julian, who is asking, given the onerous nature of the PDAC, having to sit for everything over $1 million, even if it is low risk, based on your statements, how soon will the regulations be coming in to address this issue?
Thank you, Ms. Julian, for your question. And we're hoping maybe before the end of the year or by early next year for the latest, because we're actually in the process of just finalizing and having further discussions with the Ministry of Finance to settle a few areas. It's really just a few, and thereafter the process would entail going before the LRC. So we're really hoping in short order to have this be approved, and thereafter we will provide the rollout of these amendments.
Thank you very much for your response, Ms. Mitchell. So this brings us to the end of our webinar this morning. And on behalf of the team here at the OPR, I wish to thank you for your time and engaging feedback. As mentioned earlier, we will be posting the presentation slides and a copy of this recording on our website, and we will share that link with you all the attendees from today's session. So thank you very much again for joining us today, and any further questions that you may have, we welcome you to submit an email to us at feedback@opr.org.tt. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen.